I'm Katie Hartsock. I'm a poetry professor in the English department, and I want to welcome everyone to the 2020 Maurice Brown poetry reading tonight. We are so pleased to be hosting the dazzling Amit Majmudar. And on behalf of the English department and the creative writing program, I want to say that we just wish with all of our hearts that we were in the OC, in a room together, in person, what we wouldn't give to be complaining that the room was too hot or too cold, or to be worried about the microphone turning on or not. These all seem like delicious little problems to be having in light of our distance these past many months. I wanted to go over a couple of guidelines for the reading tonight. If everybody could please mute themselves and also stop their video. I think for the best experience for all of our audience members tonight, it would be great if Amit was the main video. And I will, and I see him there. Hi, Amit. Hi. And I'll stop my video after my introduction as well. And I think also for the best experience, if you want to just in your upper right-hand corner of the Zoom window, set it to speaker view versus gallery view. I think that will be great. A Q&A will follow the reading, and if during the reading at any point you are inspired with your question, I invite you to type it into the chat. I, as the host, will see the chat, and I'll be repeating your questions for our poet and for the audience. I also want to note that Amit's books are for sale through the Oakland University Barnes & Noble bookstore. If you go to oakland.bncollege.com and then go to gifts and accessories and then select specialty books, they will pop up for you. And of course, we wish we were having a sign, time for Amit to sign books, but maybe at some wayward intersection, we can do that in the future. All right. Before I introduce Amit, I want to take time to thank Judy Brown and Matilda Brown Swanson and the entire Brown family for establishing and maintaining this wonderful tradition in our department at Oakland. Maurice Brown was a beloved English professor. His wife, Judy, who I'm so thrilled to say is able to join us tonight. Hi, Judy. So glad you're here. And she was a beloved professor here at Oakland as well. And it is part of the celebration of tonight that we are celebrating their love of poetry and also their support for the community of creative writers here at Oakland. So thank you, Judy. I also want to thank the College of Arts and Sciences for their continued support. Dean Kevin Corcoran and Assistant Dean Joe Shively, thank you so much for all that you do and for making the love of literature such a great part of Oakland. And now I would like to introduce our poet tonight. Fascinatingly enough, Amit was writing poems in his new book, which is amazing, and I highly recommend it, What He Did in Solitary, out just August from Knopf. He was already thinking about questions of interiority, the self, the solitude of memory, and all of those things came into his title collection, the title of his collection, What He Did in Solitary, which, as I said, went to press but well before the pandemic. And yet reading this collection in this year of so much distance between us has just been a revelatory experience. So much so that we can speculate that the muses, such as we get them in ancient Greece, those forces who know all things that were, all things that are, and all things that will be, I think they have been breathing some wondrous voice into our poet tonight, as the very old poet Hesiod once claimed to have experienced. And so reading this book really feels like poetry is approaching something like prophecy, which great poems do. Um, Apart from a prescience of pandemic, the main glimmering aspect that I want to talk about is just the joy of language and its repetitions, its transformations, and its music that we see in Majmudar's poetry. The worlds his poems give us go through cities, countries, cosmologies, mythologies, and these are familiar to us as readers in the Midwest, places like Cleveland, like my hometown, Youngstown, Ohio, and its sepulchral steel mill valley, I think is how you have it in your poem. But he also takes us to ancient worlds, from ancient Greek myth to Hindu myth, from Rumi to Mark Twain. And I think in this swirl of just a kind of synthetic unity of thought and experience, Majmudar seems to me just like a glowing example of an American poet. He can sing the roads of Cleveland, and he can sing ancient transformations and mythical imaginations. And it's such a pleasure. He is equally at home in free verse and form, reading poems like "The Plague Comes to Bologna" in what he did in solitary. I am a formal poetry geek, and so I love to see what he does. Like any great formal poet, he is showing his mastery by always playing and subverting the forms. And so a poem like "The Plague Comes to Bologna" has simultaneously a sense of a ballad, but also a ballad that is itself quite sick in some way, that has caught the plague, because whereas a usual ballad might alternate tetrameter, trimeter, 4/3, 4/3, the tetrameter and trimeter lines have had a fever in this poem, and they just go all over the place. And you get the sense of a ballad, and yet it's a disjointed, interrupted ballad, which so perfectly fits the poem in which the humanists are dying out. That's a repeated line as a plague comes through a city. And again, reading that poem is part of an eerily prescient experience reading this book. He also, and you'll hear him as he reads tonight, such amazing nuance in the music of alliteration, assonance, and consonance. One of his poems in what he did in solitary is called "Apocalypse Shopping List," which you can hear the wonderful alliteration there. And this speaks of seeing eye dogs bunker kenneled in Kennebunkport, Maine, to jog the flash bind through uranium rain, astronaut ice cream for the bedbound, catheters, various calibers, lice combs to harvest protein. And this shopping list form poem goes on to end wooden stakes, because you never know. 4-ounce jars of Fleischmann's yeast, gallon jugs of Zen, rabbit traps for the mice of the future, bear traps for the men. And I'm thrilled by how this poem uses the form of the shopping list with that rhyme of Zen and men, and how rhyme can normally bring things together, but in this case, spirals the fabric of that poem further apart. I will then go to my more formal part of the introduction after having given you some glimpses into the beauty of his work as I find it. I'm also really pleased to host Amit this year in this pandemic because he is a doctor. In addition to being a poet, Amit is also an accomplished novelist, translator, and a diagnostic nuclear radiologist. As I said, his most recent book is What He Did in Solitary. Other recent books include God Song, a verse translation of the Bhagavad Gita with commentary, and the mythological novel Satayana. His poetry has appeared in the Best of the Best American Poetry 25th Anniversary Edition, numerous Best American Poetry anthologies, as well as the Norton Introduction to Literature, the New Yorker, and Poetry. His prose has appeared in the O. Henry Prize Stories 2017, Best American Essays 2018, and the New York Times. His first poetry collection, 0°, did I say that right? Okay. Was shortlisted for the Norma Farber Poetry Award from the Poetry Society of America, and his second collection, Heaven and Earth, won the Donald Justice Award. He also edited an anthology of political poetry, Resistance, Rebellion, Life, 50 Poems Now, also from Knopf, 2017. His novel Partitions was shortlisted for the HWA Goldsboro Crown Prize for Historical Fiction and was named Best Debut Fiction of 2011 by Kirkus Reviews. Winner of the Anne Hawley Prize and the Pushcart Prize, he served as Ohio's first poet laureate, OH. He practices diagnostic and nuclear radiology full-time in Westerville, Ohio, where he lives with his wife, twin sons, and daughter. And maybe everybody could unmute for one moment and we could all clap and welcome Amit Majmudar. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so shall I begin?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you so much, first of all, Katie, for that amazing introduction. I mean, that introduction was like a writer's dream review in real time, and and you've really engaged so deeply with my work. And I remember last year, I think you originally, approached, and then couldn't make anything work, but it ended up, I think maybe, the fates decided that this was the right time, because it is kind of weird how the book came out and it had all these relationships to the pandemic, and I do wish that we could all be together and meet each other and hang out, and hopefully in the near future everything will go back to normal, or go close to normal, and we'll be able to do those kinds of things again. I want to thank Oakland College. I want to thank the Brown family for being patrons of the arts. I think that poets and the arts, we rely on people like you and that kind of love of the art, of our art forms, to kind of give us platforms, give us places where we can share with what looks like 70 fellow lovers of poetry. And I'm honored that you would all spend some time with me tonight. And in the spirit of what Katie was talking about, I'll start out with my new book, which is What He Did in Solitary. And I'll start out, with some of those Midwestern poems. I think you guys are in the Midwest. I have lived my whole life in the Midwest. And this poem, this is the first poem of the book. It's a poem about growing up in the Midwest, and at the same time being super bookish, so that it was almost like I wasn't even there. I was always in the library and always in the world of literature, and always trying to kind of perfect my art and do all that. And I got to thinking at one point, what did I miss? What was missing from my boyhood and from growing up? And naturally, it kind of interwove with the literature of boyhood. So Twain, Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn. And so this is called The Adventures of Amit Majmudar. Never laid a snare for nothing. Never caught a bullfrog. Broke my slingshot wishbone wishing. Never had a smoke. Never clipped a baseball card to thutter in the spokes. My fist clenched an ink pen, and I learned what to think when, and never swore no honest Injun, and never spat and never struck. Where you gone, Tom? Where you at, Huck? I call myself a man today, though I've never been a boy, and dug for treasure in the woods, or lost myself in play, feared dead for 7 days, until I showed up by my grave and made a sniffling town rejoice. I could have been a pirate, Mama, at least a Robin Hood, but I was always up to something employable and good. And now I'm down here in this cave, crying to be saved, though I reckon I'm stuck. Where you gone, Tom? Where you at, Huck? Another poem I'm going to read is particularly dear to me because I like to read it out loud. And a lot of my poetry is written as things to, amuse you if you read them out loud. And this poem is all about Ohio, and it's all about the Midwest, and it's all about the ways in which the Midwest has changed over time when, economics and immigration, all these ways that it's changed. And at the same time, this goes back way back formally, and the verse form that it's based on is like the Beowulf meter of Anglo-Saxon poetry, where there's like a caesura in the middle and there's alliterative verse. And so this is called Chillicothe apostrophe. Chillicothe is a small town here in Ohio. It's about an hour away from me, I think. And I pass it on the highway. And so this is called Chillicothe apostrophe. It's my poem to Ohio. Here's my ode et amo, ode to you, O homely Ohio of the torn up turnpike, semis crisscrossing your map like mud-flap magnificent buffalo, Frankfurters sweating under flecked hot lamps, backcountry ice cream parlor parking lots, cacophonously Kanye, where the white boys wear wife beaters and talk black with platinum plated buck teeth, counties once Ku Klux, now bling bling. Your Amish kitchen smoked ham and pancakes, your former fighter pilots with Parkinson's in whose mute dementia Ashland is Inchon, your trickle crooked creeks once flush, now fishless, and spanned by rust-rotted struts, your coal car carcasses, your house husks, shucked of equity, to the brambles abandoned, necrotic Cleveland, suburb encrusted, equal parts elegy and punchline, Youngstown with no young, steel mill sepulchral, Painesville painting herself Pabst blue, oh you, fought for, fawned over every 4 years, when donkeys and elephants, asinine, self-trumpeting, stampede your stadiums, factories, fairgrounds, state of the suddenly sad-eyed barflies and shrunken truckers with saggy tattoos, of immigrant internists, soft-spoken and cumin cologne, of table saw grandpas with stumps for thumbs, state of the ghost strip malls and the algae lake, alas, Ashtabula, cry woe, Cuyahoga, oh, nowhere I am native, maker of presidents, mother of poets, oh, heart shape, oh, hardship, Ohio, oh, home. Interestingly, this book does have a lot of weird references and spooky references to plagues, pandemics, and being alone, being, in solitary, being confined. And that was unintentional. That was actually, it wasn't even the original title of the book. And again, everything was set over a year before the pandemic started, but I originally was going to call the book Kill List, and then I went back and forth, and then ended up settling on What He Did in Solitary, because I felt that kind of covered everything that was in the book, and all the different types of poems that were in the book. And it ended up having this weird resonance in 2020. But one of the poems about plagues and pandemics is called The Plague Comes to Bologna. And because Katie mentioned it, I thought I'd read it aloud, and I've never read it out loud. And it's a fun one to read out loud because it has all these rhymes in it. And it does have a kind of a ballad meter to it, a ballad feel to it, kind of like a murder ballad, I guess, or a mass death ballad. This is called The Plague Comes to Bologna. The humanists are dying. Bubonic inkwells in their groins, lanced with a neoclassic quill, eliciting Latinate groans. After the rotten truffle sweat smell gives way to the death smell, an undertaker with an ox cart nods at the friar for the death knell. The humanists are dying like so many staggered bees of some selective, secretive disease, collapsing all their colonies. The butcher and the cobbler just don't care, and neither does the mayor. The undertaker cares if he'll be climbing stairs. The humanists are dying out as each one gets what he deserves for doing Ciceronian rewrites when the Lord desired him to serve. Into the fire with his clothes and bedpan, his wooden spoon, his reading stand, and on the desk, in the living light, the pages in his sloping hand. Now, interestingly, the book that I wrote immediately, or rather, not immediately before this, it was published in 2016. It's called Dothead. And this has some poems in it about the same exact thing. And interestingly, one of them is literally called, so this was published in 2016, and it has a poem in it called Pandemic Ghazal. And this Pandemic Ghazal refers to like New York City and stuff like that. And like, it's weird. It's kind of a little bit spooky, and it's a little short and fun to read. And so this is called Pandemic Ghazal. Virus infinitely versatile. Virus of guardrail, iPod, turnstile. Virus eager to go the extra mile. Virus seaborne, colonizing the enchanted isles. Virus airborne, whistling all the while. Virus discreetly flashing holster and assassin smile. Virus smuggling fever up the Red Nile. Virus of folk song, urban legend, official denial. Virus squatting on the sky, chameleon style. Virus in New York City, scheming how to make a pile. Virus never standing trial. Virus believing God gave it guile. Virus making a killing and making it in style. I'm going to take us back to my very first book. It was written, the poems were written in the early 2000s, and it was published in 2009. It's called 0 Degrees, 0 Degrees. At the time, I fondly called it 0 Sales, 0 Reviews. That was my self-deprecatory joke about it. But it's found its way in the world, as have I. And so this is one of the poems that still sticks with me from this book. I'm never so much of a fan of my old work. I publish a book and then I just don't think about it. And part of me hates it. It's like kind of like, I always feel like I've let myself down, or like it's not as good as I want it to be, or that I imagined it to be. But this poem kind of held up over all these years. And it's called The Miscarriage. It's in blank verse, and it was originally published back in 2005. So that's one of my earliest poems that I ever published. Some species can crack pavement with their shoots to get their share of sun. Some species lay a purple froth of eggs and leave it there to sprinkle tide pools with tadpole confetti. Some species, though you stomp them in the carpet, have already stashed away the families that will inherit every floor at midnight. But others don't go forth and multiply as boldly, male and female, peeling the bamboo, their keepers watching in despair, or those endangered species numbered individually and mapped from perch to oblivious perch. For weeks, the world, it seemed, was plagued with babies, forests dwindling into cradles, rows of women hissing for an obstetrician, Babies no one could feed, babies received by accident, like misdirected mail from God. So many babies. People hired women to hold them. Babies, babies everywhere, but not a one to name. When we got home, the local news showed us a mother with quintuplets. She was suckling them in shifts, a mountain of sheets, universally admired. A goddess of fertility. Her smile could persuade the skies to rain. Her litter slept ointment-eyed in pink wool caps, while Dad ran his hand through his hair, thinking maybe of money, as he stood surveying his crowded living room, his wealth of heartbeats. Pizza and pop that night, and there, unasked, inside the bottle cap was sorry, try again. You set it down and did not speak of it. The moon flanked by her brood of stars that night, a chaste, distracted kiss good night that night, your body quiet, having spilled its secret, your palms flat on your belly, holding. Forgive me if I had no words that night, but I was wondering in the silence, still begetting silence, whether to console you. If I consoled you, it would make the loss your loss. And so we laid beside ourselves a while, because I had no words, until our bodies folded shut, our bodies closed around hope like a book preserving petals, a book we did not open till the morning, when we found hope, dry and brittle, but intact. I'll bring us back to my current book. 1 second, let me just close the window in case there was ambient noise from the traffic going by my window. I'm going to bring us back to What He Did in Solitary, and I'm going to read another poem from it that's also actually in the same verse form as the poem that I just read you from 2004, that I wrote in 2004. And this is a poem, years later. I wrote it after the 2016 election, and it kind of holds true. I think it still holds and is appropriate now, as well as we approach another election. And it kind of stems from all, the kind of thoughts that I think a lot of us are having about our country, where our country's going, and just basically the past and the present and the future. And this is called Of Age. And it's addressed to my kids. My kids were big American history buffs back then. They were going through a phase of, really, they memorized all the presidents and they knew all this stuff about the presidents. And then they got to watch their first election season back in 2016. And this was to them. And it's called Of Age. You've come of age in the age of migrations. The board tilts and the bodies roll west. Fanaticisms come back into fashion, come back with a vengeance. In this new country, there's no gravitas, no grace. The ancient Chevys migrate west and plunge like maddened buffalo into a canyon. Where the oil slick geese go, no one knows. Maybe the Holland Tunnel, because they take it for the monstrous turbine promised them in prophecy. I brought you to this world, and I do not regret it. The sky is still blue for now. I want to show you an island where the trees are older than redwoods, ever since Prospero turned them into books. You'll meet him when you're ready. For now, though, study this list of endangered species. It's incomplete, of course, since all species are in some danger nowadays. This is the country I bequeath to you. The country I bequeath you to. You've come of age and you're inheriting the whole house, busted pipe and splintered deck and all. This is your people. This, the mythic West, your grandparents wished to reach and reached. The oceans surge, but the boat is up on blocks. There's no America to sail to anymore. I think I will read a somewhat lighter-hearted poem after that, or maybe lighter-hearted with a little darkness to it. And this one comes from 2016's Dothead, and it's called TSA, and it's about going through airport security. Back when I was still flying places before the pandemic. So this is called TSA, and you'll notice as you listen to it that it's got the lilt and the song-like aspect of light verse. So it sounds like light verse to the ear, but it's talking about something more serious than that. So there's this combination of light and dark, lightheartedness in the meter and the rhyme, and then a darkness in the content. And that was kind of what I was playing with. So this is called TSA. Off with the wristwatch, the Reeboks, the belt. My laptop's in a bin. I dig out the keys for my jeans and do my best Midwestern grin. At O'Hare, at Atlanta, at Dallas, Fort Worth, it happens every trip. At LaGuardia, Logan, and Washington Dulles, the customary strip is never enough for a young brown male whose name comes up at random. Lest the randomness of it be doubted, observe how Myrtle's searched in tandem, how Doris's six-pack of Boost has been seized, and Ethel gets the wand. How polite of the screeners to sham paranoia, when what they really want is to pick out the swarthiest, scruffiest of us and pat us top to toe. My fellow Ahmeds and my alien Alis, Muhammad alias Mo, my buddies from med school, my doubles partners, my dark, unshaven brothers, whose names overlap with the crazies and God fiends, ourselves, the goateed other. And while I'm here, I think I might as well read the title poem to this collection, which is called Dothead. And as Katie mentioned, I do write a lot about mythology and ancient traditions and stuff like that. And one of the funnest things to do is bring all of that directly into the modern world, bring it into not just modern language, but sometimes a modern setting. And so this poem takes place in a high school cafeteria. And I'm talking about, the bindi, the dot that is worn by Indian Hindu women with some of my classmates. And so it takes place in it starts out in a high school cafeteria in suburban Midwest, suburban Cleveland. And then it kind of takes us to a different place. And there's a mythological reference at the very end. And for those of you who may not be familiar, the word is Nataraja. And Nataraja is the god who dances the dance of destruction at the end of time in a sphere of fire. And so we'll get there from that cafeteria. And it goes like this, Dothead. Well, yes, I said. My mother wears a dot. I know they said third eye in class, but it's not an eye, not like that. It's not some freak third eye that opens on your forehead like on some Chernobyl baby. What it means is, what it's showing is, there's this unseen eye on the inside, and she's marking it. It's how the X that says where treasure's at is not the treasure, but as good as treasure. All right. What I said wasn't half so measured. In fact, I didn't say a thing. Their laughter had made my mouth go dry. Lunch was after world history. That week was India, myths, caste system, sati, all the greatest hits. The white kids I was sitting with were friends, at least as I defined a friend back then. So wait, said Nick, does your mom wear a dot? I nodded, and I caught a smirk on Todd. She wear it to the shower and to bed? While Jesse sucked his chocolate milk and Brad was getting ready for another stab. I said, hand me that ketchup packet there. And Nick said, what? I snatched it, twitched the tear, and squeezed a dollop on my thumb, and worked circles till the red planet entered the house of war. And on my forehead, for the world to see, my third eye burned those schoolboys in their seats, their flesh in little puddles underneath, pale pools where Nataraja cooled his feet. I'll read you the one of the title poems of What He Did in Solitary. And there's actually 3 poems with very similar titles. What He Did in Solitary, What He Dreamed in Solitary, and What He Drew in Solitary. And they're all in the final section of the book, which has these poems that are about, that have a theme of confinement, aloneness, incarceration. And in the context of the rest of the book, you see that it has like an element of, it has this metaphysical side to it where the confinement and the aloneness is not just solitary confinement, it's all of the person in the prison, it's actually also the solitary confinement of the soul and the body. So it's very much about embodiment and incarceration. And I'm going to read you the last poem. It's the last poem in the book, and it's part of that trio of poems. And this is called What He Drew in Solitary. What He Drew in Solitary. An occult chalk outline of his brother on the floor, a gap where his mouth should have gone for black ants to file through like song notes. Illustrations for a pop-up book for blinded boys. You turn the page and run your fingers airily along a wall. Crooked white fences between himself and despair, 4 finger-length fence posts and a cross slash repeated all the way around. A single eye on a single brick. His brother keeping watch through an observation slit. Dashed lines of a flea flicker from John Madden football they played as boys. One of those dashed lines wandering off toward the ceiling, X marks the spot. A treasure map from the Chateau d'If to the island of Only. Shin-high sunflowers, seeds stippled with Vicodins. A sun for those sunflowers too, so ghostly pale, it turned into a moon at night and made the water level in the toilet bowls subside and rise in tides. A shin-high cross beside the dead-end road where boyhood crashed, killing his brother, leaving him, the sole survivor, cursed to grow into a grown man slack-limbed on a prison cot, quadriplegic, unable to stand this wanderlust, butane torching ulcers in his flesh, while lust expels itself in chalk dust teardrops on his palm, drawing him deeper into self-erasure. Gaunt body, hunted skin, drawn face, illuminating the scripture of his solitude, in which there is only one God, one way, and that way inward, to the fund of images he draws on, replenished every evening by a distant, indulgent father, making up for his long lostness with these lengths of chalk, these drawings in the dark, Basilica Basquiat's in his brother's nightstick fractured skull, exposed to sunlight by a pipe bomb laid in his boy body's inviolate Vatican. Illustrations, lustrations in the cloister, bareback Jackson Pollocked with a penitential whip. Here in his cell, in solitary, fighting himself to a draw, drawing sustenance, drawing from the well, drawing his family like a treasure map from memory, drawing in the face of faces turned away forever. Breath, breath, breath. And that's what he drew in solitary. And that's what I've been doing in solitary, writing poems and, trying to make some music for you with language. And it's about 6:45 p.m. We can probably open it up to questions now. And I can, if any question prompts or triggers some poem that might illustrate an answer, I can, add that into the reading as well. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Or I can keep reading, whatever you guys feel you'd like.
I will just pop back in and thank you so much, Amit. This is so delightful. I have been laughing and tearing up and then laughing again and then going, oh, in the solitude of this office. Thank you so much. I would, and you just said you're trying to make music. And you are, by the way. And just today, actually, I had told Amit that I've been teaching the Orpheus and Eurydice story to my mythology. And so today I sent them, before the reading, your poem, Observing Orpheus. And I'll just try and find it here because I want to get the line right. Let's see if I can find it.
I think it is
on 88.
Okay.
Okay. So, but I just wanted to say, music's meaning is its making, and I just love that line, not only in the context of Orpheus, but also in the context of, I think, how a lot of us have been dealing with this pandemic and our solitude has been to make our own kind of music, whatever that means, whether it's family time or walks in the woods or poetry or actual music with our lyres or not. And so I want to open up now to the Q&A. So I just wanted to thank you for your music and sharing this with us. And I think this has been a wonderful experience, even in our separate spheres. So Fred Brown, I see you have a great question here. Would you like to unmute and ask it yourself, or would you like me to ask it for you? I think this is a great group, and I think perhaps we could unmute and ask our questions so it could see your faces, or I can ask the questions. Oh, okay, so I will ask Fred's question. And Fred Brown wants to know, how has medicine influenced your poetry, and which poem best reflects that influence?
Oh, so I think that, what I do as a doctor is not like the typical thing that doctors do where you go into the office and you get seen by the doctor. I'm a radiologist. So basically, when my shift, I'm actually working 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. today. So a little bit later, I'm going to go start my shift. And what that basically entails is that I go down to my basement. I recently have gotten the capacity to do this from home. And then there's this huge set of monitors and high resolution screens. And then I actually just go through cases of CTs and ultrasounds and X-rays. And then I basically write reports on every one of those studies. And you describe the normal and abnormal findings, and then you have an impression where you basically summarize the findings and say what you think is going on. And what's so in that sense, I read about 16,000 cases a year, and I've been doing that since 2009, basically, and that's not counting what I did during residency. So by far the bulk of the writing that I do is medical writing, is radiology writing. And that's, no matter how many books I publish, it'll never be as much as I write on a daily basis often in radiology. And what that entails, what that field entails is, first of all, observation. And so you have to keep your eyes open. You got to be very, very perceptive. If you miss something that's like 3 pixels across, it can be a life and death thing. And it's very, very, it's a little bit nerve-wracking, because you can really have a big effect one way or the other on patients' future and literally life or death issues based on tiny things that you can miss, or if you just, if you just scroll past it, you don't see it, you don't look for it. And so looking for the right things and finding the right things and observing, keeping your eyes on the world around you, or on the study, is analogous to how poets have to keep their eyes open and eyes on the world around them. And then there's the language of the radiology report. And the language of the radiology report has to do with both precision. So, if there's an abnormality or like a mass or something, you have to measure it. You have to give the measurement. You have to be precise about it. You're going to get X centimeters by Y centimeters. You give it out to one decimal point, and then you track that over time. So, you have to be very precise. But at the same time, sometimes you have to be ambiguous, because appearances overlap. And even though it's like this, several $1,000, study that is done using 3 Tesla magnets and things like that, the actual thing that comes out, a lot of times there'll just be ambiguity as far as what you're seeing. And so you have to give what's called a differential diagnosis. That's where you're saying it could be this, it could be that, it could be this, it could be that. And so it's this dance between precision and ambiguity. And when you write poetry, you can increase, the effect you have on the reader based on how you deploy precision and ambiguity. And if you give too much detail, too much information, you can kill the effect. But at the same time, if you have some really precisely observed detail, which you can then, deploy in some way, that precisely observed detail can have its own effect and its own, power in the context of the poem on the reader. And I've actually written, I don't write very much about radiology. I don't write very much about medicine, but I have done that. And I've actually written a poem called Radiology, believe it or not. And this poem is basically, where did it go? Is it hiding from me? And yeah, here it is. So this poem is actually just called Radiology, appropriately enough, and I'll read it because it's not too long. I'll read it. And this is from Dothead. Picture the fibrous spoke wheel scaffold of an infinitely thin wafer of orange, held to a window, transilluminated in its circumference of rind. Now picture a volume of human, reduced to planes and fluttering under my thumb like a flip book showing the disease in action. Every one of those planes, hundreds of lines stacked tight enough to resolve the speck not yet a lump. Every one of those lines, a string of pixels end to end, razor luminous horizon round a darkening world. Each pixel, a point geometry defines dimensionless, no height, no width, no depth. I see what ails the body by regressing body back to spirit. The volume a stack of planes, the plane a row of lines, the line a string of points, and the point at last nothing at all. All form substanceless by radiologic proof. I read no images more imaginary than the mind's, every layer of it immaterial, the gray matter, the white matter, the dark.
Mm. Thank you so much, Amit. And I love, my colleague Jeffrey Chapman wrote in the chat, I love that you made the argument that radiology is poetry.
It is, in a sense. Although if you read the reports, you wouldn't think so.
Same thing. And I would add, as a follow-up, I would direct your readers to the neurology of love in what he did in Solitary. And I thought that took not only the etymologies that you deal with, but also the situation that you speak of too much ambiguity versus enough detail. That's beautifully reflected there. And a really nice follow-up question to this, Jason Storms asks, do medical lexicons in any way inform your sense of language when you write in terms of your rhythm and your diction?
Yeah, I think it does. And so first of all, the medical, like as a radiologist, you're like always dealing with anatomy, and anatomy was named back, in the Renaissance, all the parts, all the little bits and parts of our body were named back in like the Renaissance when Greek and Latin were big. And so learning the anatomic nomenclature of the body is like a little mini course in Greek and Latin root words. And that really does inform what I do. And it kind of dovetails with a lot of the reading that I do and a lot of the classical allusions that I do. And then on top of that, the fact that I spend, anywhere from 6 to 9 or 10 hours a day immersed in human anatomy and literally inside I'm gazing inside the human body just 16,000 times a year. That has really brought a lot of body-centered imagery into my poetry, which is not necessarily something that I do consciously. It's just in the groundwater of my mind at this point. And so I find myself, one of the earliest poems I ever published was called Subtle Anatomy. And it was this poem, it's in my first book, and it was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And it was literally this poem where I was like imagining how the arm is the spine of an angel wing cracked at the elbow. And that's kind of like how we're angels. And then in the second stanza, I talk about how the human spine is like a centipede or something like that. And, there's like this whole imagery where I create this like devil imagery with that. And so from the very earliest thing, that was 1999 that I published that poem, and I probably wrote it in 1998. So as early as that, I was very much into anatomy and nomenclature and lexicon, that kind of thing. And I didn't know I was going to be a radiologist back then. That was before I was like the very start of medical school, first year of medical school, that I wrote that poem. I didn't know I was going to be a radiologist, but then I ended up going into a field where anatomy is everything.
Thank you. That is fascinating. I love how you know that you looked into the human body 16,000 times a year. That's the
caseload. Yeah, that's what we do.
Wow. So this is a kind of going into a broader writing question, but Alexander Kiriakou would like to know how you go about your creative process of making
Come on.
poetry, and how you get into that mindset to create your poetry. And I think that I would like to just add on to that question by asking, you said that you didn't know you were going to be a radiologist, but when did you know you were a poet? Like when did you start studying form and free verse and kind of writing in either and then both? So I'm also interested in how, like, if you could speak when you're talking about how you make poetry, how did you start making poetry, and how did you get to be a master of both free verse and
I don't know
form?
if I'm a master, but I've been doing it for a long time. No, you know what's interesting is that I've been obsessed with writing for a very long time. So my earliest stuff that we just sold my parents' house, and I was able to unearth these archives that are printed out on dot matrix printer paper, which
Wow.
probably very few people remember. But you know, that stuff, and I have like these handwritten notebooks. Like I was doing this like when I was maybe, like fifth, sixth grade, seventh grade, and I was so obsessed with it. And I started out writing spy novels, and they were not even spy novels; they were literally James Bond novels because I didn't understand copyright infringement. And I actually sent it to G.P. Putnam's sons. I just printed it out, and I put some 3 rings through it, and I sent it out, and they sent it right back. And I was like, these people don't deserve me. But then that was like me at age 12. But then somehow at like age 13, 14, 15, I kind of got tired. Well, I mean, I read so many thrillers and espionage novels, and I started going down that route. But then I got tired of it for some reason. I think I just like, I don't know what happened, but I just ceased to be as interested in it. And then I was reading this random book by Nelson B. DeMille. I don't even know who that is. And I think he's just like a popular fiction writer. And he had this quote from Nietzsche in it. And I was like, who is this Nietzsche guy? And then I got like the basic writings of Nietzsche. And at the same time, my sister had been reading Dante's Inferno in for school, and because she was 4 years older than me. And I was like, what is this? She's like, oh, it's about hell. And you wouldn't get it. And I was like, wow, it sounds interesting. So I went and got a copy of that too. And I remember, and after that, I was hooked on just everything. I mean, that's powerful medicine to start with. That's like addictive. Nietzsche. I I went through a phase where I would like write all these aphoristic philosophical essays, just like Nietzsche, and it was like a big mess. But after that, I just took off, and I just read relentlessly, and then I just started imitating what I was reading. And so when I was 17, I self-published a book called Entrance, and that book has a lot of stuff in it. In fact, one of my earliest poems that I have memorized of mine was written back when I was 16, and it's Picnic, and it's this Dickinsonian pair of quatrains. No, it's a single Dickinsonian quatrain, and it's like, there is much casual in death, much random at our last, as if God, chatting on a lawn, were picking at the grass. And so that's from like when I was 16, and because I was imitating Emily Dickinson at that time. In that same book, that same self-published book that I wrote back when I was 17 years old, I have all these blank verse dramas because I had been reading Shakespeare and I wanted to resurrect the verse drama. So that was me cutting my teeth on blank verse and rhymed poetry. And so I've been doing like the same stuff in some form or another for a very long time. And how do I get in the mindset? To go back to the original question, I'm always in the mindset. I don't have time to, kind of meditate and wait for some moment to strike or lightning to strike, because I just don't have the lifestyle for that to happen with 3 kids and the day job and everything like that. So I'm like always churning. I got always something churning in the back of my head, and I feel like I have parallel processors or something. A lot of times I'm thinking about it, in between cases at work, or just randomly, walking in the park or whatever. Like, I'm always thinking about it. And then when I get a minute, I'm just like, all right, let's do this, And so I just have like a parallel processor, I think.
I would agree that you do. That's so amazing. And I think several of our questions and I think that that goes into this topic, that several of our questions have wanted to know, how do you balance not only radiology, parenting 3 kids, including twins,
Mhm.
um, writing both, in poetry and novels, and translating. Do you have, as John Corso Esquivel asked, like, how do you balance that writing practice with your medical practice? And yeah, like, how do you exist? I think we would like to know.
You know, I'll tell you what it is. I exist. I mean, I do these things. First of all, I'm a very monomaniacal person, and like I have a very, I know, I would say that it's not technically an OCD issue, but there's elements of, psychotic behavior, of obsessive behavior, that I have. And that's why I don't drink. Like I've never sipped alcohol in my life. I never tasted it, because I know that if I like it, and if I get into alcohol, I'm going to be the biggest. I'm either completely nothing, or I'm like the biggest lush that you'll ever meet. Right? I'll give myself liver failure, and that's just my personality. So like I work out like really, really crazily hard, like 6 days a week, and that's because like I decided that a long time ago, when I was like 16 or 18, 17 or 18, I was like, I'm gonna, I was like, I was just like, I'm gonna be super fit, and I'm gonna have like a resting heart rate under 60. And then I just like, I'm like crazy about it. And similarly, like in my life, like I have certain things that I want to do, I want to get done. And like, I'm just obsessive about those things. And then I just could care less about everything else. So anytime, any given day, at any given time, I'm doing one of a handful of things. I'm either sleeping or eating, obviously, we'll leave that aside, but I'm either with my family, doing radiology, doing literature, or working out. That's it. That's it. I'm not watching television. I'm not watching sports. Very rarely I watch the finals, because that was family time. If my family was not there, if my twins were not there, my twin boys were not there with me to watch the finals, I would not have watched the finals. But they're there, and it's like we scream at the television together, and we're like, LeBron, yeah, yeah. And so like that's like family time, so that counts as family time. But I would never watch sports on my own. Don't watch movies on my own. Don't watch television on my own. I barely hang out, with anybody, like, other than my family. And so it's just like I have a very streamlined life. I'm very boring. I don't do interesting stuff. I'm just a boring dude. That's how I do it, I guess.
I would disagree with that last thing. um, and I wanted to also just tell everybody that what he did in solitary also contains some great basketball poems. One of which is kind of a love poem to your first pair of Air Jordans.
Yes.
So that's also a fantastic element, I think, of all the many aspects of life that come into your poetry.
Yeah, that first section has a lot of poems about the Midwest and about growing up and boyhood and all of that stuff. So I put those up front because a lot of those things have to do with like, growing up. And I think that was also kind of gamesmanship, because I feel like that's more relatable than some of the kind of more esoteric stuff that comes a little bit later with like metaphysics and like, all that kind of stuff. So like the more accessible, I try to put the most accessible stuff up front to kind of get people in through the door and get them to know, or to get them to know me as a person. And then I can kind of launch off into, mythology and metaphysics and stuff like that.
Yes. I wanted to bring in a couple of different questions. First of all, Shakia writes that she wanted to tell you, I absolutely love that verse about God picking the grass. Are there ever times that you find yourself struggling to articulate what it is you're trying to say? I'll just let her, that be the question.
Yeah, as far as, struggling to articulate things that I want to say, my problem is perhaps the opposite, where like I want to make sure what I'm writing is, tight and meaningful, and I want to sort of um, rein it in and get it under pressure, because my tendency is not like, oh, writer's block, I don't know, I can't get a word out. It's more like blah, 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 blah. And so then I have to kind of, and like, like there are forms where I get obsessed with a form. And I was telling about my obsessive personality, like, I've gotten obsessed with the ghazal, and then will just knock out like 40 of them and they'll be trash, And so, but it's like kind of just, I regard that as practice. I regard that as getting a hold of the form and getting a ability to manipulate that form. And then I'll be like, okay, slow it down, get yourself together, and then like, put something meaningful into this and everything. And so I have not generally had that problem historically. And that's why, I write a lot, as you can tell. But anything can happen, I guess. The main thing that I've had trouble doing is I probably have a lot of trouble writing my own life and writing my own personal life. And I know that the only book that I've had to redraft is this as yet unpublished memoir about my son, who had some, when he was born, we had twins, and then one of the twins was born with a congenital heart defect. And it's just like this whole saga, this epic saga of all the things that he went through. And I wanted to write that down for him. And I wanted to record that. And I wanted to create it in a form that is readable, not just by him, but also by, all of you. And that was the hardest thing probably I've ever had to do. That was the hardest, that was the work that I had to draft and redraft and had a lot of trouble with. Yeah. So that's because it was writing real life, and that was writing like very personal stuff and real life stuff, as opposed to just extemporizing stuff and like creating scenarios and characters and stuff like that. That I find that a lot easier because it's not me, it's not me and it's not my family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd say on that point that what he did in Solitary has so many poems that are thinking through like mythical characters or historical characters. I love Elegy for Van Gogh's Ear. Really touches my heart.
Thank you.
Just wonderful. But it seems like, and this is something that I think all of our writers here at Oakland, are creative writing majors and minors, whether they're doing prose or poetry, it's balancing that difference of, sometimes it's easier to say something about yourself when you're writing in the voice of someone else, or writing like through someone else.
Agree with that. I totally agree with that. And my first novel was Partitions, and that's actually from the perspective of a deceased father. So it's like a ghost who's telling the story technically. Mm-hmm. And he's writing about his twins who are caught up in this historical upheaval. And one of the twins has a heart defect, right? And the other one doesn't. And he has to be helped out by his twin. And that's a major crux of Partitions. That's a major plot element, as these twins and this father worrying about his twins. And that's something that I was able to write in fictional form. Yeah. Long before I ever tried to get the reality of it down in, in a memoir form.
Yeah. I think we have time for just one or two more questions. Sure. Kevin Corcoran asks, your two worlds, and I think he maybe is referring to something you said earlier about going between perhaps radiology and literature, seem to shift between the visual and the verbal. Is this something that you are aware of?
Yeah, I think radiology is about visual and verbal for sure, because you're looking and you're describing. And I think poetry is often like that too. And I think that, it's not something I do consciously. I don't do a lot of things consciously. Like I just kind of go into a zone and I'm not entirely sure. Like I don't over-determine it. And there are a lot of poems that I don't know how it's going to end. I don't know what the next line is even. I just go with a mood or a sound or an image or something like that. And I just let it build itself. So I don't know if I'm doing all that stuff consciously, and I'm not, but I am aware of it, but I'm not doing it consciously, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I would just quickly add on to that. I know you said that you go through kind of obsessions or phases of obsessions with certain forms.
Mhm.
You had a beautiful pantoum in a recent issue of 32
Oh
Poems that
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
loved. Um, do you, is part of that intuition or mood or feeling, that does that include gravitating towards a certain poetic form?
Yeah, I think that there is a certain uh, attraction that form has. There's a certain um, desire. For me, a lot of times, like a form is like a vacuum that I really want to fill, and just the decision to write in that form will call words and images and ideas out of the ether. And so embodiment pantoum is the pantoum you're referring to. Like that started with the willed desire that I want to write a pantoum and I want it to have a certain feel, like a certain fugue-like character. And that's completely like where it begins. That's like the seed of it. And that is almost like not a verbal seed. And it's not even an emotional seed. It's like literally a formal or a sculptural or a shape-based uh,
Mhm.
seed for a poem or trigger for a poem. And then all these emotions about, love and breaking up and all of that stuff gets drawn into that vacuum. And that's that's why so many of my poems are in form. That's why so many of my poems are in meter and rhyme, because like it has that power. It has that power to create, ex nihilo, create a poem ex nihilo. And then in retrospect, I look at that pantoum or that ghazal or something like that, and I'm like, that's something I was feeling, and that was something I was thinking about, or that's something that means something to me, and yet it didn't have to exist. And what made it exist is the desire and the love of a form, of a shape, of a sound.
Oh, that's so beautifully put. I love that what made it exist was the desire for a form. That's so lovely. I'm going to write that down. Hi. Um, and then just our last question, and it's actually a very appropriate last question because it speaks of last things or finality. How do you decide when a poem is finished and ready to be shared?
Oh, how do I decide that? I feel like the poem itself decides it. A lot of poems that people write, they kind of quote, avoid closure, quote unquote. I don't generally do that. Like I will write and then it'll kind of like, it'll have its finality to it. And then I'll just know, just because that's it. I mean, that's it. It's just like, it is there, it's hard for me to answer that question because um, I revise as I go. I don't often revise stuff afterwards. It's
Mhm.
not like, and so for me, and Lord Byron once wrote something in a letter to one of his friends that really made sense to me, where he said, in poetry, I'm like a tiger. I pounce and I either get it or I don't get it. And if I don't get my prey, I go grumbling back into the bushes, right? And so with poetry, I'm kind of like that. Like I'll have that notion, I'll have that will, I'll have that desire, I'll have that mood or that sound, and I will pounce and I write very quickly. I'll try and get it down. And then, I'll go into the zone and I'll get it through. And then, sometimes if it doesn't work, it's just a discard. It's a discard. And I don't fiddle around with it so much.
Mhm.
But then other times it's ready to go, and it knew where it wanted to be. So that's it. Yeah, and thank you all very much for listening and having such wonderful questions. And thank you for giving me this opportunity. This is such a wonderful thing for me. I don't do very many readings. I don't have very many uh, opportunities to do this kind of thing. So I'm very grateful to be given this opportunity.
Well, we are just absolutely thrilled that you spent this time with us. And there's lots of things coming in the chat, like how wonderful this was, and it was amazing. And I also want to note that came up in the chat that Tilda Brown Swanson, Judy's daughter, wanted to note that her father, Maurice Brown, would have been 92 this year, and Judy herself will be turning 90 at Halloween. So, so happy 90th, Judy. So glad you could be here with us tonight. And thank you, Tilda, as well. Thank you to the whole Brown family, and thank you to our Oakland family for coming out. And thank you so much, Amit. This was an utter delight and comfort in these days. So maybe we could all unmute briefly and give a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And everybody stay safe and well. Thank you so much for coming, everyone.
Thank you.